One name that crops up time and time and time again when you talk about prog rock is Yes. And I'm very happy to say we are joined with legendary guitarist Steve Howe on the phone. Now, Steve, how are you tonight? You're very welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm fine. How are you, Tom?
Thank you very much. I'm fine and in great form. Delighted to talk to you. We've been talking about prog rock. I've been watching documentaries on it. We've been trying to get our head around it and, where it came from and how it started. You were playing guitar before it arrived. But would it be right in saying that your kind of style of guitar playing wasn't, ideally suited to 60s guitar pop?
Well, yeah. I mean, I dabbled a little bit. I did some sessions, and some of the bands I was in were a bit commercial. But Tomorrow in 1967 was a very adventurous psychedelic band, and that's where the reference. That's partly why I got to play in Yes, was because Chris saw me there. John Anderson saw me later playing in another band after Tomorrow. But, I was finding my own form, but I was looking for a band that could really play and my imagination could run wild.
One of the touchstones in this is the Sgt. Pepper album from the Beatles, that it changed how people saw what you could do with the studio and where you could take music. Was that part of what was in your mind as well?
Well, yeah, they'd already started to develop the fact that you weren't just hearing a band like on Please Please Me, the first album. You heard a band playing in a studio, end of story. And it was a couple of overdubs, and it was great, But, of course, they developed, like the Byrds and other bands, like Pink Floyd, developed their own kind of, music that was much more free from the constraints, and went off at all sorts of tangents.
So what was in your mind when you were joining Yes? What were you hoping to do? Where did you think it might go?
Well, I was looking for a band of really, really talented musicians who were just as highly creative as possible, and I met my match, I mean, these guys were brilliant, and of course, my guitar style from psychedelia was really what I carried on doing with Yes, more electric stuff, and of course, what I'd been doing between Tomorrow and Yes was really learning more about songwriting and the struggles of how you get your songs up and good. But when Yes started to develop the writing, as it did of all the people in the band, Chris and John wrote some great stuff, and John Anderson and I wrote some great stuff together. So we kind of, flowered,
Did you have it when you were in rehearsals, writing songs together? Would you have a kind of a notion of, just take it where if the music wants to go, or how did it all work?
Well, I mean, it's a long story, but I mean, from, us having ideas individually, putting them together, piecing stuff together, that's quite ingenious. But when we get in the rehearsal room, what we're really trying to do is elevate it, knowing that when we get to the studio, we can take it even a stage further. There's things in the studio we're thinking, well, we can do that in the studio, but it's harder to do that now. Let's assimilate that. So we'd, if you ever said, like we did in the Yes album, we said, let's have two bands playing at the same time, two Yeses. Obviously, we couldn't do that in the rehearsal room, but we could imagine it. And I guess we carried on doing that, particularly with Eddie Offord in the early years. We carried on doing that and learning the art, our art, learning about our art.
Were you left to your own devices to do this? There wasn't a record company man sitting in the corner saying he wanted a three-minute single or anything like that, was there?
Well, apparently, the first two albums were worrying Atlantic, and they really only had a 3-album deal. So the Yes album had to break through. Well, fortunately, it did. And from that on, Ahmet Ertegun in particular gave us 10 years of total support. Obviously, he enjoyed our successes. Like Roundabout was very successful, and therefore, he felt very comfortable. But they did give us a completely free hand, even on the solo albums, and so they were wonderful people. Ahmet Ertegun was a great figure to have around the band.
Were you aware of the other bands that were kind of part of what was seen as prog rock? Bands like The Nice and King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer when they arrived. Were you aware of them? Did you see them as rivals?
I guess we saw them as competitors. I mean, it was fun to obviously be part of the circle, a bit like Tomorrow felt in psychedelia. That rising of the sort of what we now call prog, was competitive, but it was exciting because none of the bands were really the same. You couldn't really take bits of one and stick it on the other, and I don't think anybody wanted to. Certainly, Yes felt very kind of within themselves felt very that we were making our music, and we didn't want to be too influenced by the other guys, but certainly we were aware about it. You couldn't escape it, and it was also good to rub shoulders, with people in those bands. We had some good nights,
One thing it said in the documentary was very few females at the gigs.
That used to be the case. It's not so much the case now.
It changed?
Well, I guess, many people stay together. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say, I'd hate it to feel that it's restricted to any particular grading. I don't think there is grading in music. I think anybody can do anything they like. They can listen to what they like. But we're always thrilled when, people travel from Japan to see us. They're quite often, ladies too. So basically, there are people all over the world that share of both sexes.
Okay, glad to hear it. Close to the Edge has been defined by many people as being the definitive statement of prog rock and the high point of it. How did you all feel about it when it was made?
Well, we were really, really excited. I mean, Bill felt that we'd reached our peak there, and he wanted to go off and do something else, which was astounding. I mean, we were so shocked, and we missed him so much. We wanted him to stay. But it was a big statement. It was a very grand thing. Bill had done 5 albums with the band, and certainly the Yes album, Fragile, Close to the Edge, was a sort of ascending stairs. And basically he very bravely put his musical instinct beyond anything else. But for us, it was really celebratory, and Eddie, the work with Eddie and the kind of sound we were looking for and the intricacy of the arrangements and the overdubs and the kind of, like we did in the centre where we sung In Her White Lace as well as other things in the background, and we really used all of our skill, I guess.
As it went on, after Bill had left, there'd been quite a lot of ins and outs with the bands over the years. There's a few things though I'd be interested to get your take on. One is the view that when punk rock came along, it blew a lot of the prog rock scene out of the water. How did it seem to you when those bands arrived?
Well, we'd learnt to rebuff statements. You musicians have to be quite thick-skinned. But we felt that we were getting a balance from America, that we had a strong acceptance there, and there wasn't this quite wave of interference in that particular market where we were, so we were quite stable. So although, we had to be a bit tongue-in-cheek sometimes about some of the things that were being said, like we were by the NME, after calling us the People's Band in 1973 or something, then they called us Rock Dinosaurs in 1978, So you can see where it was going. But there we go, we came up with Drama, which is one of the albums we're going to be playing in this tour. Yeah. And that shows you that we couldn't ignore the fact that there was an edge in the music, and that album's kind of nicely edgy. Yeah. And Yes started as a rock band. When you hear Sweet Dreams, or you hear Yours Is No Disgrace, you hear Don't Kill the Whale. You hear basically a band that fundamentally is rock, and I think we got back into that beautifully on Drama, and it's exciting.
The other change, of course, was John Anderson going and Trevor Horn coming in. Yes. How did you feel about that?
Well, everything that's happened in Yes, and including the most recent, tragedies, are come about. We don't want them. They happen. Things develop. But at the time after we'd recorded Tomato, and then we'd had a slightly failed attempt at some recording in Paris, Chris Allen and I got in a room, a rehearsal room, and it's like pounding away with this kind of futuristic music, we felt, that was Tempest Fugit and things like this. And it didn't quite go where John and Rick would go, and it wasn't, there was this, separation in there. So once we had that, then we were looking for two guys who were really, thinking like we were, like the edge of it, and they had some songs, and, we could share stuff, and we could have fun together. So basically, you have to have that internal fun, right. It's a very important thing.
How did you feel about Owner of a Lonely Heart?
Well, I mean, I got to understand why it's like it is, And at first I thought, oh, this is such a change. This sounds like Asia, really. Dun, 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 dun. And you got dun, 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 dun. It's quite formularized, like Asia was, and we were quite happy to be like that. So in a way, I thought, yes, maybe it adopted a bit of a modernism at that time. And when you see the video, I am allowed to laugh. But basically, there was still the light of the music in there. They did, they did Big Generator as well, and after Union they did Talk. But for me, I'm a '70s guy.
Yeah, okay. Roll of the punches, it seems. So back on the road now, in summer, isn't it?
Well, sooner than that. No, more or less in spring, really, because we're on the road. We start in a couple of weeks up in Glasgow, and we're on the move, and we go right through to the 1st of June when we finish in Rome. So we've got it's all Britain to start with, and then it's over to Europe. So then we take a break and we go over to the summer tour in America, which starts in the last week of July. So we're going to be quite busy.
My God. Punk hasn't really affected you at all, it would seem.
Well, no. Yes. But there's beautiful people out there who like beautiful, gentle music. And in a way, part of our thing is that there is a gentleness in our music. And even when we're kind of rocking, it's still on the edge of, not too hard.
Yeah. Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Great, Dom. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad I got in touch with you. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks. Steve Howe from Yes.